Not long ago, some of you may have read about a team of mountain climbing scientists who helped to recalculate the elevation of the highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest. Of course, the elevation of Mount Everest was determined many years ago using traditional surveying methods. But these scientists wanted to make a more precise measurement using a new method that takes advantage of recent advances in technology. It's called the Global Positioning System. The Global Positioning System uses 24 satellites that circle the Earth. Each of these satellites is constantly sending out signals, and each signal contains important information that can be used to determine the longitude, latitude, and elevation of any point on the Earth's surface. Well, in order to use this system to calculate Mount Everest's elevation, scientists needed to put a special receiver on its summit to receive signals from the satellites. The problem with this was that, in the past, the receivers were much too heavy for climbers to carry. But now these receivers have been reduced to about the size and weight of a handheld telephone, so climbers were able to take a receiver to the top of Everest, and from there, to access the satellite system signals that would allow them to determine the precise elevation. And it turns out that the famous peak is actually a few feet higher than was previously thought.
If you like the colorful animals we just saw, you're going to love these next animals. Frogs. You might not normally think of frogs as being colorful, but these frogs definitely are. They are the dart poison frogs of Central and South America. Look at their striking colors, often yellow with black stripes or deep blue with black spots. Beyond being nice to look at, these markings have a purpose. They warn predators that these frogs are poisonous. When threatened, these frogs secrete a substance through their skin that would easily kill whatever animal might try to eat them. Their bright colors communicate this, and so most animals tend not to hunt them. Now, speaking of hunting, for centuries these frogs were sought after by hunters. As you might think, the hunters didn't want to eat the frogs, but rather they captured them for their poison. They would add the poison to the tips of their hunting arrows. Of course, nowadays, most hunters use guns. These days, dart poison frogs are of less interest to hunters than to medical researchers. Researchers believe that they can make new heart medicine from the poison because it acts as a stimulant on the body's nervous system. Researchers think they could use it to stimulate a weak heart. There is, however, a problem with doing research on these frogs. Those that are caught in the wild will produce their poison until they die. However, those that are born in captivity, like the ones you see here, will not produce any poison at all.
I'd like to start this lecture on the use of technology in education by talking about a subject that's probably close to all your hearts, which is the way that student work is graded. And specifically, I want to talk to you about some of the ways written assignments or essays are marked. Well, as you all know, traditionally writing done by a student is checked, marked and graded by a teacher, a tutor, or, in some situations, an examiner. In other words, a real person. Software to mark essays has been in development for some time, and grading software on computers is already used by some universities to mark exams, but it is still viewed with suspicion by some. How can a computer mark an essay, they ask? Well, a recent study compared the human ability to give grades to student essays to the ability of a computer to do the same job. In the study, over 16,000 essays were used. These essays had already been previously marked by at least one trained human grader. The study showed that the essay marks given by the computer software were almost the same as those from human graders, which I think you'll agree is a controversial result, and it's likely to make us as teachers re-evaluate how we grade written work.
Woodblocks used for pictorial illustration became fairly common in 15th century Europe, but had been used long before that for printing designs on textiles. Most of these were simple in design and quite crudely cut, but some were skillfully drawn and cut, while others even contained pictorial imagery. Records show that woodblock printing on fabrics was practiced by the Egyptians as early as 2000 years BC. The oldest existing printed fabric, which is Egyptian, dates from the 4th century. At the same time, the craft seems to have become widely established, even commonplace, elsewhere, for example in India, Mexico and Peru, where the same techniques continue to be practiced today. And the technique was almost certainly used by both the Japanese and the Chinese too.
Signs advertising business premises have been around for thousands of years and were used in ancient Egypt, Greece and Rome to attract customers. And they often used symbols to illustrate what kind of business it was. For example, bushes or branches of ivy meant the place was a tavern. Both of these, the tavern and its sign, were introduced into Britain by the Romans in the first half of the 1st century AD. In Europe in the Middle Ages, signs became more common. Then, in the 14th century, English merchants were obliged to have them outside their shops. However, the fashion was to have large swinging signs hung from a strut sticking out of the wall, and many public houses still have such signs. But so many accidents occurred, mostly involving people on horseback, that in the 17th century a law was brought in, requiring shopkeepers to mount their signs flat against the wall of the premises, where they could do no harm. So, I want to discuss dissertations now. Our experience is that final year undergraduates and master students can struggle to find a suitable topic for their dissertation. Often they're not able to come up with a viable or suitable area to research. Another problem may be that the topic they choose is too broad and needs to be refined. So anyway, eventually their proposal is submitted and approved. But then, after some background reading or a deeper consideration of research methods, they may well want to modify their original proposal to some extent. Well, that's fine. We expect modifications as the work progresses. This is normal. What we don't want to happen is that the student repeatedly wants to completely change the whole approved topic or original proposal to something completely new, and that does happen at times.
You've all probably heard about zoning laws, but many people are confused about what they are. So I'd like to cover them now. Local governments such as cities and counties typically pass zoning laws. They regulate how people use the land in certain parts of the city or country. Think about our city for a moment. It's divided into various districts. Some are commercial while others are residential. This isn't accidental. It's intentional. The city developed this way because of zoning laws. You see, in the commercial district, there are businesses. And in the residential district, there are houses and apartments. You can't open a factory in the residential district, and you can't erect an apartment building in the commercial district. You can't do these things because of zoning laws. There are actually quite a number of zones. As I just stated, there are residential and commercial zones. There are also industrial, agricultural, and recreational zones. Industrial zones are for factories and other manufacturers. Agricultural zones are for farms, and recreational zones are for parks, lakes, and sporting facilities. So why do we need these zones? Well, think of it like this. Would you like a factory located right next to your house? How about a huge farm next to the shopping mall downtown? Or what about a big warehouse with lots of trucks next to the park? Yeah, that's what I thought. And that's why we have zoning laws. They keep various buildings or businesses out of places where they don't belong.
These days, nearly everyone with a mobile phone is able to take photographs, or even make a video. But originally, cameras were so large and heavy that photography's appeal as a pastime was limited to a few enthusiasts. Also, the time needed for the exposure meant that your subjects, if you were photographing people, had to remain still for what must have seemed like a very long time. Movement would come out as a blur in the picture, or, if someone walked across the view of the lens, would not register at all, which is why early photographs of city streets appear deserted. In other words, all pictures had to be posed. However, as early as the 1880s, manufacturers in both Europe and America began producing miniature models, some of them small enough to be hidden in people's clothing. Cameras came in all shapes and sizes. Handbags, walking stick handles, and tie pins were among the oddest, and were collectively known as detective cameras. This was not because they were used in police work, but because the user could move about without attracting attention.
They who beheld with wonder how much he eat upon all occasions when his dinner was to his taste could not easily conceive what he must have meant by hunger. And not only was he remarkable for the extraordinary quantity which he eat, but he was, or affected to be, a man of very nice discernment in the science of cookery. He used to descant critically on the dishes which had been at table where he had dined or supped, and to recollect very minutely what he had liked. I remember when he was in Scotland, his praising Gordon's palates, a dish of palates at the Honourable Alexander Gordon's, with a warmth of expression which might have done honour to more important subjects. As for Maclaren's imitation of a made dish, it was a wretched attempt.
The spinal cord, the link between the brain and the body, is a band of nervous tissue about the thickness of your little finger that runs through the backbone. Nerve cells called motor neurons convey electric impulses that travel from the brain to the spinal cord, branching off at the appropriate point and passing to the various parts of the body. Similarly, sensory neurons transmit messages from organs and tissues via the spinal cord to the brain. But the spinal cord also functions without the brain having to intervene. It alone controls those actions called spinal reflexes that need to be carried out very fast in response to danger.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. This'll just take a minute.
Captain Crunch, the cereal named after me.
When you walk down the cereal aisle, do you ever get the feeling that Captain Crunch is looking at you? Well, that's just silly. He's actually looking at your kids. That's according to a study by Brian Wansink and colleagues at Cornell University's Food and Brand Lab. The researchers wondered whether the characters on cereal boxes actually make eye contact, and whether that could influence a shopper's choice of breakfast fare. So they hit the cereal aisle, and they found that kids' cereals tend to be placed on lower shelves than grown-up offerings. What's more, Tony the Tiger and his kid-friendly pals tend to gaze downward, while the Quaker Oats guy stares straight ahead. In a second study, adult volunteers were handed a box of Trix. On some boxes, the rabbit looked straight ahead. On others, he gazed away. When asked what they thought of Trix, it seems that folks felt more connected to the brand and said they preferred that cereal over others when the rabbit looked them in the eye.
I forgot to take the Trix. Trix are for kids.
The results, which appear in the Journal of Environment and Behavior, suggest that certain tricks are not just for kids, but may be for marketers too. Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
She has been in the library for a long time. New media has an impact on human communications. The library has a number of collections of historical and social statistical publications. You should submit your essay by midnight tomorrow.